Hi, David. Thanks for joining me in this conversation through your emails and being willing to show up here, which is fantastic. I began Adept Play with two games in mind. One is Cold Soldier and one is The Pool. And so there's lots of material here with talks and seminars and who knows what. Well, let's move straight in. I'm going to assume anybody watching this has read the posts and has some idea of the questions you've raised. Well, we are right in the thick of talking about authorities. And I have to apologize in advance because I said, well, to understand your questions, we need to understand the difference between this kind of authority and that kind of authority. And you completely got it, moved on with the discussion, and now you've raised another issue, and I'm going to turn around and say, oh, by the way, there are two other authorities, and we have to talk about those. I see where this is going. I mean, certainly you must, by this time, be imagining that you're going to raise up something else, and I'll say, oh, by the way, there are 8 other kinds of authorities. No, that's it. Just 4. They're talked about in my replies above. In this particular post, I actually lay them out, and hopefully that's a good template for you to sort of refer to. Well, before I do that, 2 quick points. Quick point number 1. Let's not keep going with what if, because there are some dangers there. One is that we're not really talking about real people and real play, and we can make up anything we want. And even if we're doing that in good faith, still the tendency is to raise techniques that we're not familiar with or not comfortable with, and then assign to them people that we've imagined who are playing them in a disruptive or power mongering way. So it gets tricky. We favor the techniques we like with good players, and we tag the techniques we don't like by saying, look what bad players will do. So let's not kind of make up more what ifs to address. We have better ways, I think, of coming up with understanding the rules. Now, then, the other thing that I want to say in this long introduction is about the text of the pool itself, which, as you know, dates back a considerable number of years, and I do not use it as its own complete manual for understanding all of the issues that it raises. So we can find all kinds of ways that the text of the pool walks into potential problems, and that I'm turning around and saying, well, hold on, with addressing these problems, the engine of the pool ends up still being, or now turns out to be, pretty remarkable. One can then say, well, how come the game doesn't say that? And one can say, well, my answer anyway, is that the pool is remarkable for exposing these questions rather than answering them, at least in the sense of a dedicated step-by-step, do this, do that kind of manual. But it exposes them partly in writing and definitely in play, and it exposes them in a good way, because when you arrive at functional answers, you go, wow, I totally get that there are different ways that people have authority over different things that aren't the way we've said this in the past. It's not just the world and the characters, there's other things. Well, so let's not pick on, the text of the pool and merely give it credit for raising these questions rather than going to it and pointing out, oh, it doesn't say that. I say, yeah, I know. What do you expect? A work of genius, what else do you want it to do? Okay, well, let's go on to your issue that you've raised. The proper question, really. I mean, issue sounds like a problem. No, it's the proper question. And we are talking about a monologue of victory, which does not violate backstory, just as you say. The next question is, what is it doing? And I'm going to say that the monologue, as you've provided it, has many virtues in that it's not violating backstory and it is moving things along. All good. But now let's take a look at the other authorities that it is either violating or nudging in ways that we should at least acknowledge. And quickly to review, I know I just referred to the posts above. Quickly to review, more or less in order, I guess. We have backstory authority in the sense of who's making. I mean, if there's a murderer, who killed the dude? The corpse is bleeding into the carpet. We've all got our cups of tea, and who killed the dude? We are not doing multi-improv out of a void in this game. Somebody, call the game master in this case, knows. Okay. We have situational authority, which is, at first glance, you're like, well, what's the difference? If I prepare a scenario, the backstory sets up the situation, so they're kind of the same, right? And the answer is not really, because situational authority applies to play. You could have the backstory be the same, but then begin play in two very different situations. At the very least, you could even have just different player characters. That's a whole different situation right there. Furthermore, situational authority moves forward during play. In other words, it keeps being applied in terms of what's going to happen now. The most obvious is when there's a fairly hard cut to a different time and location, but really, any kind of sort of shift in, okay, now where are we and what's going on, who's there, what's happening, who's doing what. You and you are in the parlor, but you are in the bathroom. Now, this could have, of course, arisen out of former announcements and activities in play. That's fine, but sometimes that can get a little confusing. Sometimes a little wiggling of time and space is necessary, whatever it takes, but somebody. Sometimes it's distributed, around the table for different people to say. Sometimes it's one person. But somebody is going to be saying, all right, no, actually, you're in the kitchen, remember? Or by now you should be at the kitchen. Stuff like that. So, situational authority, that's just in terms of character's placement. Situational authority can have tons of other things, whether the monster that's wandering around is going to come around the corner or not. Stuff like that. Whenever we feel kind of a strong shift there, then that's situational authority. Okay, that's two then. And then there's what we've talked about before, which is, I guess the best way to describe this is narration authority. Notice I didn't say narrative. Narrative is, let's not do that. Narration authority, talking about the way that a resolution occurs. And it can merely be descriptive of the outcome, or it can provide some more raw material of some kind. And it's remarkable what descriptions can turn inadvertently into powerful raw material. So that's narration authority, effectively. So it's its own thing. Now, here's the one that I just skipped over. Because in order to have narration authority, you need to have outcomes. You can call them by all kinds of words in role-playing. Resolutions, but whatever it is that something has occurred, we have applied the system to have it occur. In the pool, we're looking at the dice and seeing if there's a 1. And certain aspects of it do come in the narration of the outcome, the most literal part, in terms of the conflict that has just occurred. But in terms of how it happened, in terms of what it looks like now, in terms of like the beginnings of what's going on next, or what could be relevant to what's going on next, that's all in narration authority. So outcome authority is pretty important, and one can say, well, that's easy. We just have dice for that, right? The answer is, in practice, role-playing games have tons and tons of different outcome authorities. Some of them are honest, some of them are dishonest. There are plenty in which the text even mandates, roll the dice all you want to, because for some reason people want to, and then the GM will just say. So that's a different kind of outcome authority. If that's what's going on at the table, then never mind what the book says. But if that's what's going on at the table, then that's how the group is handling outcome authority. The pool, as written, and as I rather favor, treats outcome authority as more as a hard constraint rather than just something to, ritualize and ignore. You look at the dice, and sure enough, whatever it was going into the conflict that mattered, just state why we're rolling the dice. You and this dude are fighting a duel. I want to win. And that's what we're rolling the dice about. Outcome authority, we look at the dice, bam. Somebody says, you'll discover that in play, Either it's one person or it's known to be shared. Somebody's going to say, I succeed, or you succeed. They're using the dice as the constraint in order to say that, but the way it's said is always, in every role-playing game, remarkably consistent in saying, and that's a wrap. That happened. You can even have people, use systems and talk and say what they're doing, roll dice and whatever, and then you can wait for it and you'll hear the words. That happens. So think of that as outcome authority. All right, 4 kinds, right? What's going on fictionally in the backstory? Backstory. What's going on right now, and what now that all this has happened, what's going on now? Situational authority. Outcome authority. What did we just establish incontrovertibly has occurred? And there's no take backs. We're done with that part. This has happened. Outcome authority. Finally, narration authority, which is piggybacking usually on outcome authority. It can also relate to several other stated acts when the narration is full of potential. But narration authority when you say how things have occurred and details of their immediate consequences. Okay, so you can see we've been playing with half the deck in our conversation so far. I really shouldn't interrupt myself like this. But notice 2 things in authorities. 1, everything I'm saying, even though I keep saying somebody, I don't necessarily mean a solo somebody. That differs by game. 2nd, the role of mechanical constraints of some kind. I just talked about wandering monsters. That's situational authority, but in the games that I'm familiar with, used a role. That's okay too. Any authority can have instrumentation built into it. Outcome authority is merely the most obvious. So far, so good. All right, that was a break. I probably jumped up and down on these terms enough already. Finally, your example. As I say, you have avoided the problem of stepping on backstory authority. Fantastic. Now, we are going to look at what that narration includes. Number 1, does it have the description of the outcome? It's actually a little bit thin on the actual description of the outcome, although I guess you said, that the player goes ahead, takes the information of, who murdered who or whatever it was that mattered, and then, narrates being told. Not necessarily utterly mechanically. Let's stop your example and stay with this part of it. The way that they were told about that sensitive information by that character is non-trivial, and we shouldn't quickly just gloss over it. They're not a Muppet who's just saying what the GM told them to say. The player is actually taking narration authority by taking a monologue of victory because they have a notion of how this would occur. How did their character act to do it? How did the other character respond? Some of this is set up by the prior role-playing before the roll. Some of it remains to be finalized. That's outcome authority. That's narration authority now that we know the outcome. Good. So that's the first thing, is that we your example kind of skates a little bit over that extraordinarily powerful, important, and fun part of the monologue of victory, and jumps into other authorities entirely. Specifically, situational. Is this bad? No, because now I will go to the text. The pool actually does say, you know what? A monologue of victory is more than just narration authority. It has itsy bitsy pieces and leans into the zone of situational authority. Fantastic. Okay? Narrations often provide raw material for upcoming situations. Here, the player is taking a certain piece of that known process that we've known about ever since the beginning of role-playing, takes a piece of that and says, you know what, I love that, and I have a notion, and does so. So let's take a look at this and break it down a bit. We have the narration of the outcome as such, which is the discussion of the information, and now we have, standing with it, arm in arm, a bit of situation authority about some details of the moment. that adds into what's going on now. What are the limits of this situational authority in regard to the pool? Because the narration you provided, unfortunately, brings in the shadow partner of some backstory authority regarding the princess's emotions and perspective. That's where things get dodgy in your example. There are too many authorities piling into the clown car at the moment here. The monologue of victory is narration authority with a nice handy helping of situational authority to be added as desired. It's very strong. It's very fun. Bringing in that backstory authority, though, in this way, it kind of slipped into the back seat along with it. That's where things get dicey. Again, just knowing what these are. You don't have to have this huge legal discussion with every single person, taking a monologue of victory. Just knowing what these things are is all you need. And people are real good at it, actually. Again, we're used to taking narrations of outcomes and rolling in momentary descriptive stuff that had just been kind of discovered or even thought of at that moment, and then that becomes powerful raw material on an opportunistic basis for situations. We're used to doing that. So all the pool is doing is saying, hey, do you like doing that? It's really a gift to the game master. Because you're not going to be setting up, you don't have the biggest situational authority. You don't say, okay, and now we're the next day, it's noon the next day. But you've certainly provided some raw material for when that kind of play happens. So let's keep a look at your example. By bringing in some situational authority, you're definitely in the zone of what the pool can do, which is in addition to the narration authority of the monologue of victory. Bonus. You'll notice it's opportunistic. Sometimes a player does it. That brings in that kind of cousin authority. Sometimes not. But beware the sneaky backstory creeping in. What Princess Pickle is about. What she wants. What she's upset about. Anything like that. Remember, enjoy game mastering. I'm a player in the pool, and I enjoy the fact that I don't have to come up with a backstory for this game. It's a great feature, just like it is in games where that's the case. Embrace it. Say, I don't mess with backstory. Don't drag it in overtly, by saying, and he tells me the murderer is so-and-so. And don't drag it in sneakily by saying, oh, this princess in the crowd faints, and this is why. Right there. See, we all know what backstory is and how it's different from everything else. Leave it out of monologue of victory. Leave it out of player activity. Enjoy the game master's prep. The game master in the pool does very, very well to have the kind of prep that we're all familiar with. But it's just not prep of what's going to happen. So I hope this makes some sense. I'm thinking maybe a Monday lab, which is these group discussions we have. A Monday lab might well be called for poolness. Maybe I can even get James involved. That would be superior. Okay. Thank you. Take care.